Hello and welcome to Claer Barrett's Business Clinic, live from the FT. I am Claer Barrett, the FT's personal finance editor. Today I'm joined by Andy Bounds, the FT's enterprise editor, and we are talking about the big news event of the week. Tomorrow, Wednesday, the UK Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, will deliver the long-awaited summer statement. Now, this isn't a budget or a mini budget, but it's the first time that we've heard from the Chancellor in detail since his emergency budget last March, just before the start of lockdown, when, of course, so many big announcements were made to support the business world, most notably the coronavirus job retention scheme, which has now got over 9 million UK workers furloughed, receiving their pay direct from the government. Now, nobody is expecting the Chancellor to dip his hand so deeply into his pocket for the summer statement, but we are expecting to be updated on a range of further measures that the government could be using to help businesses through the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis. Now, we're going to have a little bit of a preview today about what we can expect while you are watching in the various different places. If you want to put a point up for discussion or ask me or Andy a question or comment on what we're saying, so we're very keen to hear the views of business leaders everywhere, you can do so on the ft.com article. If you're watching on ft.com, just make a comment at the bottom of the piece and it will get through to me on my iPad. If you're watching us on YouTube, then you can use the live stream comments to leave a message for me. Or if you're one of the people who are watching us on LinkedIn, hello to you. We know we have lots of people from around the world. If you would like to make a comment, then again, just do it on the live screen and it will pop up on my iPad. And we'll try to get to as many of your comments and questions as possible. So Andy, let's kick off with just a bit of a reminder of the things that the Chancellor is expected to, or is rumoured to, be announcing in his statement tomorrow. Lots of things have kind of already had a bit of a preview in the press, notably £1.5 billion in a lifeline for the crown jewels of the UK arts industry. Now, that's a lot of grants and a little bit of loans to protect mainly the big arts venues in the UK, which obviously have not yet been able to reopen, the music venues and the theatres in particular. But one of the more eye-catching measures is how he's trying to curb youth employment with a subsidy for firms who are taking on workers under the age of 25. How's all that going to work?
Yes, it's something called a traineeship, which isn't probably as widely known as apprenticeship. Apprenticeship's obviously a long-term 2-year program or more, which leads generally to a job. This is a traineeship, which is more a blend of work experience, getting yourself ready for work. And companies already run these, but they will be able to get £1,000 for taking on a young person. He's put £111 million behind this. So roughly, I guess that gives you an idea of how many people might be helped. And it's for any under 24, and they spend several months, 6 weeks, between 6 weeks and 6 months is the period of it. They get some training in maths, English, and how to prepare a CV and sort of soft skills that you need for work. And they'll also have to get a work placement for 60 to 90 hours. So it's a sort of, it's not quite a job creation scheme. It's a sort of getting people ready for jobs. And I guess we have to hope there will be jobs for them to go to afterwards.
Well, and also quite a challenge, I would have thought, for a lot of businesses, particularly office-based businesses who haven't gone back and are still working from home, as anybody watching can clearly see me and Andy both are. Very, very difficult to, foster the right environment for trainees if it's all being done over Zoom. But let's move on. I'm sure we'll get lots of comments about that from people who are watching. But the biggest kind of debate in this whole arena is the one of tax cuts to stimulate demand in the economy versus the need maybe further down the line for tax rises to help the Treasury get back some of the huge amounts that these various initiatives are costing. But Andy, what kind of tax cuts are people hoping the Chancellor may announce tomorrow?
Yeah, I think he's very much still in this sort of stimulation phase and therefore looking at tax cuts more than trying to claw money back. That may come in the budget. We'll still have a budget in the autumn, as we always do, which may give us more of that. But I think at the moment he's desperate to get the economy firing, which will obviously then help generate taxes if businesses are doing well. So he's talking about, as ever with these things, you get tidbits, you get briefings, you get, rumours and everything in between. So all we sort of we don't definitely know much, but there's obviously heavily rumoured to be a VAT cut, possibly targeted at the hospitality industry only, but or possibly wider, which obviously helped those by 20% reduction in their prices and costs. There's also a rumour of a stamp duty cut, which may come now or may come later on in the year when the housing market starts getting going again. We've obviously seen house prices have fallen a little bit for the first time in a while. And I think that stamp duty cut could be aimed very much at cheaper houses and first-time buyers, which would bring, possibly, it's a couple of percent at the moment for houses over £250,000. So perhaps he could scrap it up to 250,000 and cut it to 1% or something over 250,000. Lots of parts of the country you don't get anything for 250,000, as you'll well know in London. So that's a possibility. There's talk about a 6 month free, anything under £500,000 possibly being free for 6 months of stamp duty, just to give people an incentive to get moving.
Well, all of those, of course, we'll know when the Chancellor gets up on Wednesday and starts to talk. So let's just go to a couple of reader comments now. Particularly stamp duty is getting people excised. Everybody loves a good property story. Now, FT reader EMR suggests reducing stamp duty and targeting it at first-time buyers, but increasing it for buy-to-let landlords for a bit of intergenerational payback. Now, there is always a danger if you fiddle with taxes such as stamp duty that it will have unintended consequences. Do you cut it for everybody, try and stimulate demand? If that doesn't come in until the November budget, then will people stop buying houses in the meantime? Will you create a cliff edge in the system? That's something that has also happened in the past. So a bit of a difficult one to interfere with. But then, surprisingly, there are a growing number of FT readers who seem to be in favour of tax rises. One of them saying abolish the lifetime allowance on pensions, which caps pension savings at £1 million. Give the relief back to people at a lower level instead. And other people have even been talking about the likelihood of a wealth tax further ahead in the future. So clearly a whole smorgasbord of views out here from readers. But we do have a couple of people who are watching us from Leicester today. Leicester is obviously an area of the UK where there has been a second lockdown, a local lockdown, because the virus has broken out again. On Twitter, we have a lady called Bella Diva who says it's not enough. There has to be more put in place to save local businesses and local economies. Leicester has been hit really hard, and most of the commercial space in the city centre appears to be up for let. Well, an interesting point, Andy, because it's the city centres really in this crisis that have been hit hardest. The retailers, and Primark last week saying its city centre stores are the ones with the lowest footfall. There's a definite pattern to this.
Yeah, I think we've discussed this before, haven't we? We've seen it with Pret a Manger as well, starting to shut shops in city centres because people are working from home and they're more likely to use a shop local to them, which is wonderful news for those suburbs. But we've had a trend in this country, in many countries, for the city centre to become the sort of giant magnet which sucks everybody into work and socialise, and all the pubs are busy, and then people go home and sort of straight to bed. So it's one to watch out for, to see how that reverses. And if you're a property owner or a business person, maybe it's time to start looking at suburban, successful, where you've got residents with disposable income who live and might have office-based jobs they don't have to go into anymore. Could be a fruitful place to look. It doesn't help the city centre, sadly. And I think Leicester is a really interesting example, because when that story, and I was covering that story when it sort of broke, and nobody expected the lockdown to be as drastic as it was. We all thought there might be a small reversal of measures or not opening of pubs and things like that. But it was quite draconian. And then we went to the Treasury and said, well, what support is going to be for businesses? And they said, well, we've given support to businesses. They've got all the support they need. But of course, there are businesses out there trading in other towns and cities, whereas in Leicester, they're still on lockdown. They're still having to use that business grant they were given at the beginning of the crisis. And I think it'll be interesting to see in the statement tomorrow if there is any specific support for places that go into local lockdown, because you would imagine they are suffering disproportionately while their rivals are open and trading. They're having to remain shut.
Certainly, and in the news again this morning, several pubs that reopened at the weekend have had to shut again because there have been some local cases. Now, Twitter user Ondelman, thanks for commenting, says now is the time to raise taxes. We should be increasing income tax, reducing corporate allowances, using the money to clean our waterways and build infrastructure. Now, this obviously is a big project for the Prime Minister. And I'm boosting the shopping economy of the UK because I think that's one of my delivery turning up. So I'll let you answer that question, Andy, while I let him in.
Very well. Don't let him in. Just let him leave it on the doorstep, as they usually do these days. Yes, I mean, I think the time, economists would say it's not the time to be raising taxes just yet. That time may come later in the year, but you really need to get this economy going. And I think businesses would be very, they're having a hard enough time as it is without, certain taxes being loaded on them, which would make, make things worse for them. And I think a wealth tax that Claire mentioned earlier is something being discussed far more. And whoever thought you'd say that about a Conservative government? But I think there's a struggle between those who feel that income is taxed, at a reasonable level, but capital still subject to many, many reliefs. And if you're a rather rich person who takes your income in certain different ways, you can get away with a very light tax bill. And I think the government will be looking at ways of trying to stop that, because, of course, the people who are paying income tax are usually spending most of their money. And that's what you want in this economy. It's the sort of people who have vast assets but aren't really using them for anything, and therefore just taking income that they're then, saving up. They're the ones that you actually want to be either paying more taxes or spending that money in the economy.
Well, quite. And Twitter user Darryl Collins has just commented, would these measures boost the economy or further increase inequality? Wealth and land taxes would at least address that and bring money in to rebuild the economy, or becoming an increasingly more popular view. My embarrassment about having to sign for that parcel there, picked up by Jas Singh on LinkedIn, and he says, Claire, we should get Amazon and Google, etc., to cough up their fair share, taxing the big tech giants. And I have to say, people like Amazon have had a great crisis in terms of how people have been spending money there. It's the easiest way to get things. Obviously, this idea that there could even be a local shopping boost in the statement tomorrow, with the Resolution Foundation, a think tank, coming up with an idea that the Chancellor should give every adult a £500 voucher to spend on their local high street. Now, I'm not expecting the Chancellor to announce anything like that necessarily tomorrow, but you can see with all of the help that is being given at the moment and the savings rate going up, he's desperate to get us spending.
Yes, I think that's right. And I mean, going back on the digital services tax, that is in the works. Many countries around the world are now talking about doing this. There is work going on at the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The danger with it always is one country does it, and then Google and Amazon say, well, we're going to stop investing in your country and we'll put more into another country. So you sort of need the world to act as one. The Americans have been very reluctant, but you could imagine that with a new president, lots of worry about the dominance of the tech industry in the US. You could start to imagine that a digital sales tax, which would be some kind of percentage of their profit, of their sales, because it's so hard to track the profits. You could they would slap 1 or 2%. They've done it in France already as well. To put a couple of percent on every sale that Amazon makes, to put into the national coffers. Now, that the flip side is that Amazon promptly passed that tax on to the people who sell on their platform. The marketplace sellers, the small traders, who we're talking about today. So in the end, it's very hard to tax these companies, because they can find ways of passing it on to somebody else.
Well, certainly on that point of entrepreneurs, small businesses, FT reader Nightingale 2020 says, Claire and Andy, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on balancing the longer-term government investment policy for entrepreneurship and innovation against short-term political fixes, given the nature of the beast. These tax giveaways and talk of tax giveaways are welcoming, but are they productive, effective, and efficient? What other incentives could work? Well, I mean, the last time that we heard in detail from Rishi Sunak, of course, one of the things that he did at the last budget was to significantly curb entrepreneurs relief, which is a tax relief for people who've built up a business and are then selling it on, perhaps to retire. And there's a lot of anger from entrepreneurs at that move, and then subsequently that there are large gaps in support available for people who are directors of limited companies, maybe taking the initiative to start their own firm. Because of the accounting methods they use, they haven't been able to get much support from the furlough and self-employment support schemes. Yes,
there are a lot of people in that situation, and I think that calculation about long-term, short-term. The Treasury is very much looking short-term at the moment, as you can understand. The danger is that you become short-term by default, and you don't look at, as you say, what you want now is the next generation of entrepreneurs to be working out how this economy is going to work in the future. What are the COVID-proof technologies? How do you build the next Amazon in the UK? And instead, what we're going to be doing is trying to save a lot of, the old economy, because that's the quickest fix in the short term. I was listening to Michael Heseltine, the guy who sort of, came up with regenerating the regions in the 80s and recreating their economies. And he was saying what we've got at the moment is very much a sort of Whitehall-led, the usual answers taken off the shelf, a few tax cuts here, a few, building, get some roundabouts built, get some, railway infrastructure in, get some energy lagging, free energy efficiency measures in people's homes. And it all creates jobs for a while, but it doesn't necessarily create sustainable growth.
Well, indeed, and that's one of the measures that we haven't really spoken about very much yet. This was a story that the FT published this morning by our colleague Jim Pickard, that another voucher idea. People can have a voucher if they want to make their homes greener, and that ties in with a comment on YouTube that's just coming from Sahil Mangade, who says, well, what about the green recovery? Well, what about it?
Yeah, we've heard a lot of this build back better mantra, haven't we? I think the most promising along those lines so far has been there is an enormous amount of interest in cycle lanes and proper, Dutch style, Danish style cycling infrastructure. And there may be other countries, Germany has it as well. There may be others around the world I'm not familiar with. But, the UK has had this cycling boom, especially in London, and yet you still take your life in your hands to get on a bike. So many people don't do it. They've been doing it in the pandemic because traffic's been low, and lots of mayors, lots and lots of cities have plans where they really want to change this and make cycling the default mode of getting to work. But, and I think the government will fund some of that, but we're talking about huge amounts. And again, there'll still be a temptation to say, well, we'll put a new bypass in instead, because we know how to do that and it's quick and easy. The energy efficiency is really important. I think it's been underused in the past. When we've been looking at how do we reduce our carbon. It's an easy win. So it's good they're doing that. Again, these schemes have sometimes been a bit dodgy in the past, frankly. You get unscrupulous people coming around and then you find you've got terrible condensation in your house 6 months later. So I think you have to, the government's going to have to make sure it really vets the people that are doing this. And indeed, we need to know that we've got the trained people who know how to do it.
Well, whenever
you scale something up.
A couple of people watching have made a broader point about house building and the housing shortage. On Twitter, Richard Taylor has said to even have a hope of affording this strategy of build, and yes, I know money is cheap, but it is still a national debt liability. He has to redistribute the tax burden and close a lot of loopholes. And Richard finishes off by saying it's hard to tax the unemployed. Various other readers have been saying social housing should be, an affordable housing for rent should be targeted by the government's infrastructure drivers. That's where the need is. And even Sean East on LinkedIn says, in times like these, would it be better to renationalise? How about the railways and the steel industry to get started?
Well, I think the railways have almost been renationalised by default in the recent
months. And the airlines.
Exactly, because you've had so many franchises. Network Rail is effectively national anyway, and then so many franchises that have gone, bust, have been handed back to the taxpayer. So we're sort of going down that route. I mean, the danger there is always investment, isn't it? You know, the government historically is not good at investing. They're talking about doing it now. I mean, you know, one thing we haven't mentioned was Boris Johnson's build, build, build speech, you know, a couple of weeks ago, where he said we'll have 5 billion worth of investment, which, you know, we should be getting more details on tomorrow on what exactly that is. But again, you know, 5 billion is, you know, a lot less than 1% of GDP, a fraction of, you know, what Franklin Delano Roosevelt was doing in the 1930s, which is the example that, you know, Boris Johnson's given. So, you know, some of the ambition here, I think, still needs to be upped a bit.
Well, a couple of questions about the detail of tomorrow's statement, which obviously we don't have any special insight into, but nevertheless, quite a fun question. Aminata Kani on LinkedIn says, my 8-year-old has already mentally spent his £250 voucher for the local high street. So just to recap, if you weren't listening to this part, the Resolution Foundation has said to boost the local economies, local high streets, the government should give a £500 voucher to every adult and £250 to every child. We still have a few minutes left on air. If you would like to comment in ft.com, YouTube or LinkedIn about what you would like to spend your £500 or £250 voucher on, if one is issued, then do let us know. We have a further question from YouTuber Born to Pray, who asks, obviously those who don't want to be flexible don't have a choice because they can't evict anybody until August at the earliest, but certainly the landlords that are responsible are bearing a lot of the pain of the crisis. Maybe they should get the discount on stamp duty if it comes through as well.
Well, of course, that would only be if they buy further properties, and I'm not sure many buy-to-let landlords will be buying further properties at the moment when the market is stagnant and tenants could be quite hard to get. So, yeah, I can't see them distinguishing between the two, but I think they will calculate. There won't be many buy-to-let landlords out there buying at the moment. I could be wrong. Maybe it's time to pick up a bargain, but you would think that they'd already be under some stress, as you say, from having to, you know, allow tenants more time to pay and so on. Yeah, I mean, just on the voucher, if I could, my own, I've already pretty much spent my voucher. I had to buy a new dishwasher because the other one flooded, and it's actually very hard to get one. I mean, there's no stock in the country. So I think if everyone starts getting £500 vouchers, you might find your wish list may not be available, sadly.
Okay. Well, this is a very good comment from Yishan Arshed on LinkedIn, who says, will the Chancellor let me use my voucher to clear debt? Well, again, a really, really good question. We had some figures out from the Bank of England last week, which obviously showed us that the household savings rate continues to break records, but also the amount of money that British households are using to pay down debt is also rising at a record rate. And that's even with the ability to have a payment holiday on things like mortgages and car finance. So clearly, lots of people are worried about the levels of debt that they had coming into the crisis. I don't think the Chancellor would necessarily let people use money intended to be directed at the retail industry for an alternative use, but nevertheless, a very good point.
Yeah, I suspect he will find some way of ensuring you actually spend it, because that's exactly what he wants. As you say, people are already paying debt down, and you know, we're seeing the cost of that to certain high street chains. People maybe, instead of buying that cappuccino every day, are paying off, you know, debt they've got. Absolutely.
Well, we've got a couple of comments here about the infrastructure spending and the theory of Keynesian economics, a favourite of many FT readers. People saying that in times of, James Hurley, it's saying in times of low growth or no growth and contradictory policies, this is the way to go. So FT readers in the main would support greater infrastructure investment and surprisingly appear to support further tax rises. I mean, is there anything else that you are expecting Rishi Sunak to avoid talking about in the statement tomorrow, Andy? I mean, we've done a lot of these videos on the gaps in support for people who are limited company directors, people who are recently self-employed, people who have been on maternity leave and they're self-employed so that they haven't built up the level of profits needed to be able to access much from the self-employment income support scheme. I mean, I would love it if there was something in the statement tomorrow saying that there would be some more help for those people who have fallen through the cracks, but I'm unfortunately not feeling very optimistic that there will be.
No, I mean, I suspect that he's taken them the flak for several weeks now, you know, for missing out these groups. And I suspect he wants to move the conversation on to the future, you know, and here's how we build back and build back better. Sadly, we've had no sort of steer that any of these gaps will be plugged. I mean, I did a story yesterday about venture capital trusts, you know, who want to be able to put more money into their portfolio companies. These are venture capitalists who invest in young, risky businesses. They get to a certain size, and because they've had tax relief on the investment, they can't reinvest, and yet they can't also, which means they can't access the future fund, which is the way that private equity has got help, which means they have to match fund what the government puts in for an equity stake. So they're stuck with these companies that are too big for them to help out anymore. And they may see some of them, you know, sadly, have to close down. And yet they've got money they would like to deploy, but they can't. EIS is another one where, you know, there's lots of campaigns for EIS investors to say, you know, we'd like to be able to put more money into our businesses because it's sort of in for a penny, in for a pound, isn't it? The danger is if you don't up your stake and keep the thing going, you're going to lose everything. But so far, the Treasury has been deaf to those claims. And I guess we have to have some sympathy. I mean, you can imagine what his sort of lobbying list is like. I mean, just today we trotted through any number of proposals that people would like to see, and no doubt he's got 10 times that amount sitting on his desk, and he has to decide which ones are going to have the most firepower and the most fairness.
Well, a comment from a landlord, buy-to-let landlord, who's been watching us on LinkedIn, Samantha Clark. She says the increased income tax and stamp duty applied to buy-to-let landlords over the past few years isn't encouraging landlords to buy more regardless. And yes, as landlords, we are supporting those tenants who cannot pay at the moment. She says, I do it gladly to help my tenants. However, there should be more done to encourage ethical landlords. Well, a good point there, Samantha, and glad to know that you are helping your tenants.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think certainly, you know, we had it under George Osborne, didn't we? We had a big change in the status of buy-to-let landlords where I think a lot of people felt that it was a one-way bet, in a sense, to become a buy-to-let landlord. And now it's much more complicated because of those caps and you can't get the mortgage interest relief anymore. So it's a much more, you know, the returns aren't as great as they were. I think, you know, we all know we just need to build more houses, and particularly social housing, because we've never hit those housing targets without doing lots and lots of that. I mean, one thing we haven't really got onto is will local government get another bailout? I know, I think Rita was asking about that. They're still probably 6 or 7 billion short of what they need. And obviously local councils are going to be fundamental to building the economy back up and coming up with the ideas for shovel-ready projects and indeed house building, you know, council house building, whatever it might be. And they're really, really on their knees with a very, you know, lack of resources. They can't think about very far ahead because they're just trying to cope with what they've got. So I think and they'll be losing business rates from the high street businesses that go out of business. So yeah, there's a real challenge there in local government as well.
Well, many challenges certainly for the Chancellor to address. So just to recap on the measures which we're expecting to be previews in the summer statement tomorrow, which is expected at around 12:30 UK time tomorrow. The big question is, will the Chancellor cut taxes? We've debated on the Business Clinic video today what the effect of cutting the rate of stamp duty could do for the property market, and whether some kind of targeted value-added tax cut, which would reduce 20% of the price of many goods that we could buy on the high street, would do, with rumours of a £500 voucher for adults, £250 for children. I'm sure you can all think of many ways how you would spend yours. Then on the question of infrastructure, lots of big infrastructure spending projects likely to be announced, with readers pressing very highly for more housing and social housing in particular to be considered with those. With the green economy, a green boost, homeowners potentially could get another voucher, if they upgrade the energy efficiency of their homes. We could get more details on that tomorrow. And then finally, on the topic of trainees, to avert a crisis in youth unemployment, the Chancellor could extend the number of traineeships that are available for people under the age of 25 by giving firms who take on trainees temporarily a bung of £1,000 for doing so. So that sums up our Business Clinic video for today. Thank you very much to everyone who has contributed to the debate. Thank you, of course, to my colleague Andy Bounds, the FT's Enterprise Editor. We will be back next week. And of course, you can follow all of the developments on the Chancellor's summer statement tomorrow on ft.com all day. There's reaction coming in from me and Andy, I'm sure, in the afternoon and evening. Thank you very much, and we'll see you back here next Tuesday at noon. Thank you.